The gunshot that shattered the saloon window wasn't meant for Jessamine Crawford, but the blood on her hands told a different story as she pressed them against the dying man's chest in the dusty street of Tombstone, Arizona Territory, in the sweltering summer of 1882. She had been walking past the Silver Dollar Saloon when the glass exploded outward, and instinct drove her forward instead of away. The man bleeding into the dirt was a stranger, his eyes already glazing over despite her desperate attempts to staunch the flow. By the time Doc Harrington arrived, it was too late. The stranger died with Jessamine's hand still pressed to his wound, and when she looked up, half the town was staring at her with expressions ranging from pity to suspicion. "That's the third one this month," someone muttered. Jessamine stood slowly, her pale blue dress now ruined with crimson stains. She was 23 years old, with dark chestnut hair that fell in waves past her shoulders and hazel eyes that had seen too much death for someone so young. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her already soiled skirts. "Jessamine, you best get home," Doc Harrington said quietly, his weathered face creased with concern. "Nothing more you could have done." She nodded numbly and turned away from the crowd, walking with measured steps down Allen Street toward the small boarding house where she rented a room. Behind her, she could hear the whispers starting up again. They always did. Death followed Jessamine Crawford like a shadow, and everyone in Tombstone knew it. She had arrived in town 6 months earlier, traveling alone from Santa Fe after the stagecoach accident that killed her aunt and uncle. Before that, there had been the fire incident. Louis that took her parents when she was 16. Her older brother died of fever 2 years after that. Every person Jessamine had ever loved was dead, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. The boarding house was quiet when she entered, and she was grateful for it. She climbed the narrow stairs to her second-floor room, locked the door behind her, and finally allowed herself to sink onto the edge of her bed. The shaking in her hands spread to her whole body. She had tried so hard to keep her distance from people in Tombstone, to remain invisible and untouched by tragedy, but death found ways to brush against her regardless. A knock at her door made her jump. "Jessamine, it is Mrs. Potter. I brought you some hot water." Jessamine opened the door to find her landlady, a kind woman in her 50s, holding a pitcher and wearing a worried expression. "Thank you," Jessamine said softly, accepting the pitcher. "I heard what happened," Mrs. Potter said. "You have a good heart, child, trying to help that man. Do not let the gossips trouble you." But Jessamine knew it was more than gossip. She was cursed, marked by misfortune, and the kindest thing she could do for the people of Tombstone was to leave. She had been planning it anyway, saving every penny from her work at the general store. Maybe if she kept moving, stayed alone, the curse would not claim anyone else. She washed the blood from her hands and changed into a simple brown dress. Her shift at the general store started in an hour, and Mr. Henderson had made it clear he expected punctuality above all else. As she pinned her hair into a practical bun, she studied her reflection in the small mirror above her washbasin. She looked tired, older than her years, with dark circles under her eyes from too many sleepless nights. The afternoon sun was brutal as she walked to the general store, and dust devils danced in the empty spaces between buildings. Tombstone was a silver mining town, rough and tumultuous, filled with prospectors, gamblers, and cowboys passing through on their way to somewhere else. It was exactly the kind of place where Jessamine hoped to disappear, but somehow she stood out anyway. She was arranging canned goods on a shelf when the bell above the door chimed. She did not look up immediately, focused on her task, but she heard Mr. Henderson's voice brighten in greeting. "Afternoon, Rhett. What brings you to town?" "Need supplies for the ranch," came the reply, and something in the voice made Jessamine pause. It was deep and steady, with a hint of warmth beneath the practical words. "Got a list here." Jessamine finally glanced toward the counter and saw him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard for a living. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way. He wore dusty denim pants, a dark blue shirt, and a worn leather vest. A Colt revolver hung at his hip, but he carried it with the casual ease of someone who rarely needed to draw it. "Jessamine, come help Mr. Anderson with his order," Mr. Henderson called. She approached the counter, keeping her eyes down. "What can I help you find?" When she finally looked up, she found herself caught by his gaze. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the desert, and they studied her with open curiosity. "You are new in town," he said. It was not a question. "I have been here 6 months. "Then I suppose I am the new one, at least to the store. I do not come into town often." He handed her the list, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled away quickly. The list was extensive: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, salt pork, ammunition, lamp oil, and various other necessities. "You are stocking up for quite a while," she observed. "My ranch is about 10 miles northwest, near the Dragoon Mountains. Not convenient to make the trip often." He leaned against the counter, seemingly in no hurry. "What is your name?" "Jessamine Crawford." "Pretty name. I am Rhett Anderson." "I gathered that," she said, allowing herself the smallest smile as she began gathering items from the shelves. He followed her through the store, and she was acutely aware of his presence. Most men in Tombstone either ignored her completely or looked at her with that mixture of pity and suspicion she had come to recognize. Rhett Anderson did neither. He looked at her like she was simply a person, interesting and worth talking to. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, more to fill the silence than out of real curiosity. 5 years now. Started with nothing but a piece of land and a lot of stubbornness. Got about 200 head of cattle now, a handful of horses. It is good land near a creek that runs year-round. You run it alone?" "I have 3 hands who help. Good men, reliable." He paused. "It is a hard life but honest. I like that about it." She piled supplies on the counter, and Mr. Henderson began tallying the cost. Rhett paid in silver coins and then began loading items into a burlap sack. "Let me help you get this to your wagon," Jessamine offered. Outside, his wagon was loaded with lumber. "Building something?" she asked. "New barn. The old one is barely standing." He lifted the supplies into the wagon bed with easy strength and then turned back to her. "Thank you for your help, Miss Crawford. Just doing my job." He studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "Will you be at the town dance Saturday night?" The question caught her off guard. "I do not usually attend social events." "Why not?" "Because people die around me," she thought. "Because I am cursed and dangerous, and the best thing I can do is stay away." But she could not say any of that, so she simply shrugged. "I prefer to keep to myself." "That is a shame," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Well, if you change your mind, maybe you will save me a dance." Before she could respond, he climbed onto the wagon seat and tipped his hat to her. She watched him drive away, dust rising in his wake, and felt something strange and unwelcome stirring in her chest. She had not been interested in a man in years, had not allowed herself to be, but there was something about Rhett Anderson that made her forget her rules. That night, lying in bed, she could not stop thinking about him. About the way he looked at her, the easy confidence in his movements, the warmth in his voice. It was dangerous to feel this way. She knew what happened to people who got close to her. She should leave Tombstone immediately before something terrible happened, but she did not leave. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not oppressive, with a slight breeze that made the evening pleasant. Jessamine told herself she would not go to the dance. She spent the afternoon in her room, reading a borrowed book and trying not to think about Rhett Anderson. When the sun began to set, and she heard music drifting from the town hall, she closed her book with a sigh. She had one nice dress, a pale green cotton with small white flowers. She had not worn it since arriving in Tombstone, saving it for an occasion that never came. Now she took it from her trunk and changed into it, brushing out her hair and pinning it up in a soft style that framed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the young woman staring back. "This is foolish," she said aloud, but she went anyway. The town hall was crowded with people, and a small band played lively music in the corner. Couples danced in the center of the room while others clustered in groups, talking and laughing. Jessamine stood near the doorway, suddenly feeling out of place and uncertain. "You came." She turned to find Rhett beside her, looking impossibly handsome in clean black pants, a white shirt, and a black vest. His hair was still slightly damp, as if he had bathed recently, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. "I suppose I did," she said. "I am glad." He offered his hand. "Dance with me," she hesitated. This was a mistake. She should make an excuse, leave immediately, protect him from whatever bad luck seemed to follow her. But his hand was extended and his eyes were hopeful, and she found herself placing her hand in his. He led her onto the dance floor, and she was grateful it was a waltz, something she knew. His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, and they began to move. He was a better dancer than she expected, leading with confidence and grace. "I did not think you would come," he admitted. "I almost did not. But I am very glad you changed your mind." They danced in silence for a moment, and Jessamine tried to ignore how right it felt to be in his arms, how natural and safe. These were dangerous feelings. "Why do you keep to yourself so much?" he asked quietly. "It is safer that way." "Safer for who?" "For everyone." He studied her face, his expression growing serious. "Jessamine, what happened today with that man who was shot, that was not your fault." So he had heard. Of course he had. Everyone in town knew by now. "How do you know about that?" "Small town. People talk." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "They also talk about how you tried to help him, how you stayed with him until the end. That says something about who you are. It says I am a fool who cannot mind her own business. It says you have a good heart." The song ended, but he did not release her immediately. They stood there, caught in the moment, until the next song began and other couples jostled around them. Rhett led her to the edge of the dance floor, away from the crowd. "Can I bring you some punch?" he offered. "That would be nice." He returned a moment later with 2 cups of bright red punch. They found a relatively quiet corner and stood sipping the sweet liquid while watching the other dancers. "Your ranch," Jessamine said. "You must love it to work so hard at it." "I do. It is mine, you know. Built with my own hands and sweat. No one can take that away from me." He paused. "My father was a ranch hand all his life, worked for other men, never owned anything. When he died, he had nothing to leave me and my sister except debt. I swore I would do better." "You have a sister, Margaret." "She is married now, living in California with her husband and 3 children. I do not see her often, but we write letters." It was such a normal family story, so different from her own tragic history. "That sounds nice. What about your family?" And there it was, the question she dreaded. "They are all gone. My parents, my brother, my aunt and uncle. I am alone." His expression softened with sympathy. "I am sorry, that must be very hard." "It is what it is." She forced brightness into her voice. "But tell me more about your ranch. What do you do with your cattle?" He allowed the subject change, describing the rhythm of ranch life, the seasonal drives to market, the challenges of weather and predators, and the constant work of maintaining the land. She listened, genuinely interested, watching the animation in his face as he talked about something he clearly loved. They talked until the dance ended, and Rhett insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. The night air was cool, and stars blazed overhead in the clear desert sky. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden sidewalk, and Jessamine was intensely aware of his presence beside her. "Thank you for the dances," she said when they reached Mrs. Potter's front porch. "Thank you for coming tonight. I hope you will do it again sometime." "I do not think that is a good idea." "Why not?" She took a breath, knowing she needed to say this to warn him away before it was too late. "Rhett, I am not someone you want to know. Bad things happen to people around me. Everyone I have ever cared about has died. I am cursed or unlucky or just plain dangerous. You should stay away from me." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the boarding house windows. Then he smiled, slow and genuine. "Danger never scared me before. I am serious. So am I." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, the gesture tender and unexpected. "Jessamine, I do not believe in curses. I believe in coincidence and bad luck and the random cruelty of life. But I also believe in choice, and I choose to know you better if you will let me." Her breath caught. "You do not know what you are saying." "Yes, I do. I am saying I would like to call on you, court you properly if you will allow it. I am saying I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I walked into that general store. I am saying danger never scared me before, and it certainly will not start now." She should refuse. She should send him away and leave town tomorrow. But standing there with his hand warm against her face, she found herself nodding. "You are a fool, Rhett Anderson. Probably. But I am a determined fool." He dropped his hand, stepping back. "I will come into town next Saturday. May I take you to dinner?" "Yes." His smile widened. "Good. Sleep well, Jessamine." She watched him walk away, his tall form eventually disappearing into the darkness, and touched her own cheek where his hand had been. She was making a terrible mistake. She knew it with every fiber of her being. But for the first time in years, she felt something other than resignation and grief. She felt hope, fragile and terrifying as it was. The week passed slowly. Jessamine went through her routine at the general store, trying not to count the days until Saturday, but counting them anyway. Mr. Henderson commented that she seemed distracted, and Mrs. Potter noticed she was wearing her hair in softer styles. The whole boarding house somehow knew she had a gentleman caller coming, and the other residents offered clothing suggestions and knowing smiles. Saturday finally arrived. Jessamine spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready, changing dresses 3 times before settling on the green one she had worn to the dance. She arranged her hair carefully, pinched her cheeks for color, and then felt ridiculous for caring so much. Rhett arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, riding a handsome bay horse and leading a gentle mare. "I thought we could ride out to a spot I know, have a picnic dinner under the stars. If that sounds acceptable, it sounds wonderful." He had packed a basket with cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and apples, along with a bottle of wine. They rode out of town, heading northwest toward the mountains. The evening was perfect, the oppressive heat of the day giving way to comfortable warmth. Rhett led them to a spot near a creek, where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the sound of running water created a peaceful backdrop. They spread a blanket and unpacked the food, and Jessamine realized she was ravenous. They ate and talked, conversation flowing easily. Rhett told her about his childhood in Texas, moving to Arizona Territory after his father died. buying the land for his ranch with money saved from years of working cattle drives. Jessamine found herself sharing more than she had intended, talking about her parents, her love of reading, her dream of someday having a stable home. "Why Tombstone?" Rhett asked. "You could have gone anywhere after your aunt and uncle died." "I wanted to disappear." "Tombstone seemed like a good place for that. And has it worked?" "Not as well as I hoped." He poured wine into tin cups and handed her one. "I am glad it did not work, otherwise I might never have met you." "You should not be glad of that, Jessamine." He set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "This curse you think you have, it is not real. Terrible things happen to people everywhere all the time. It is not your fault. My parents died in a fire when I was 16. My brother died of fever 2 years later. My aunt and uncle died in a stagecoach accident 6 months ago, and those are just the people I loved. There have been others, friends and acquaintances, all meeting bad ends. How can I not think I am cursed? Because correlation is not causation. These are tragedies, yes, but they are not connected except by the grief you carry." His voice was gentle but firm. "You are not responsible for the random cruelties of the world. But what if I am? What if something happens to you because of me? Then it would still be worth it." "How can you say that? You barely know me." "I know enough." He reached out and took her hand. "I know you are kind and brave and stronger than you think. I know you tried to save a dying stranger even though it must have terrified you. I know you work hard and keep your promises and care deeply about people even when you try not to. That is enough for me to want to know everything else." Tears stung her eyes. "I am so afraid." "I know, but fear is not a reason to stop living." He moved closer, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Let me in, Jessamine. Let me prove to you that good things can happen too." She looked at him, this confident, kind man who seemed to see something in her worth fighting for, and felt her careful walls beginning to crumble. "I do not know how. Start small. Start with trust. Trust that I know what I am getting into. Trust that I am strong enough to handle whatever comes. You are asking for a lot, I know, but I think you are worth it." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The creek murmured beside them, and somewhere a bird called out its evening song. Jessamine felt something shift inside her, some long-held tension beginning to ease. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Rhett smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and impossibly handsome. Yeah, but if something terrible happens, I will say I warned you." "Duly noted." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture courtly and sweet. "Thank you for giving me a chance." They stayed by the creek until full dark, talking and watching the stars emerge. When they finally rode back to town, Rhett kept his horse close to hers, their legs occasionally brushing. At the boarding house, he helped her dismount and walked her to the door. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "When? Tomorrow, the day after?" "Every day," she laughed, the sound surprising her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed. "You have a ranch to run." "I will figure it out. Say yes." "Yes." He kissed her then, softly and briefly, just a gentle press of lips that left her breathless. "Good night, Jessamine." "Good night." She floated up to her room, her lips still tingling, her heart pounding. This was dangerous and reckless and probably the most foolish thing she had ever done. But for once, she did not care. True to his word, Rhett found reasons to come into town frequently over the next few weeks. Sometimes it was legitimate ranch business, but often it was clearly just an excuse to see her. They took walks, had dinners, sat by the creek talking until the stars came out. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to build a proper house to replace the rough cabin he currently lived in. She told him about the books she loved, her secret desire to learn to ride properly, her memories of her parents before tragedy struck. The people of Tombstone began to notice. Mr. Henderson teased her gently about her cowboy. Mrs. Potter asked pointed questions about Rhett's intentions. The other store customers whispered when she walked by, but the whispers were different now, more curious than suspicious. Then, 6 weeks after that first dance, disaster struck. Jessamine was closing up the general store one evening when she heard shouting from the street. She rushed to the door to see a rider galloping into town, his horse lathered and exhausted. "Fire!" the man was shouting. "Fire at the Anderson ranch. Need help." Her blood turned to ice. "No, no, not Rhett. Please, not Rhett." She ran into the street, grabbing the rider's stirrup. "What happened? Is Rhett hurt?" The rider, one of Rhett's ranch hands named Tom, looked down at her with a soot-streaked face. "Barn caught fire. It spread to the cabin before we could stop it. Boss sent me for help. He is still there fighting it with Pete and Jackson. I am coming with you. Miss, it is not safe. I do not care. If you will not take me, I will follow on my own." Tom must have seen the determination in her face because he nodded. "Can you ride?" "Well enough." Someone brought her a horse, and she swung up clumsily, grateful she was wearing a simple skirt that allowed movement. Tom kicked his exhausted mount back into motion, and Jessamine followed, her heart pounding with terror. The 10-mile ride felt like 100. By the time they crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread below them, the cabin was fully engulfed in flames. Figures moved in the firelight, forming a bucket brigade from the creek, but it was clearly too late to save the structure. Jessamine slid off the horse and ran forward, searching frantically for Rhett. She found him near the water's edge, his face blackened with smoke, filling buckets and passing them up the line. When he saw her, his expression went from surprise to anger. "What are you doing here? It is not safe. I had to make sure you were alive." A loud crack split the air, and they both turned to see the cabin's roof collapse inward, sending up a shower of sparks. The other men shouted and backed away from the heat. "It is gone," Pete said, his voice flat with shock. "All of it." Rhett stood staring at the burning wreckage, and Jessamine saw the devastation on his face. 5 years of work, his home, everything he had built, reduced to ash and memory. And it was her fault. She knew it was her fault. The curse had struck again, as it always did. "I am so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry." He looked at her blankly as if not understanding. "Why are you sorry? You did not start the fire." "But I brought this on you. I warned you. I told you I was dangerous." His expression cleared and he reached for her, pulling her against him despite the soot and ash covering them both. "No, no, Jessamine, this is not your fault. Lightning struck the barn this afternoon. It was dry wood and bad luck, nothing more. But everything I touch, everyone I love dies or gets destroyed. I am not dead. My men are not dead. We are all fine. It is just a house, just a barn. They can be rebuilt. You do not understand. No, you do not understand." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "This is life, Jessamine. Things go wrong. Buildings burn. People die. But that does not mean we stop trying, stop living, stop loving. It just means we rebuild and keep going. I cannot watch you lose everything because of me. I have not lost everything. I still have the land, the cattle, most of the horses. I still have my men. And I still have you if you do not run away from me now." She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that this was just coincidence, just bad luck with no supernatural cause. But years of grief and guilt were hard to overcome. What if next time it is worse? What if next time someone dies? Then we will face it together. His eyes were fierce in the firelight. "I meant what I said. Danger never scared me before. I am not letting you go because of a fire." Behind them, The cabin continued to burn, but the danger of the fire spreading was past. The men stood watching, exhausted and filthy, their faces showing resignation and determination in equal measure. "Boss," Jackson called out, "we should try to salvage what we can once it is cool enough." Rhett nodded but did not release Jessamine. "Stay with me tonight," he said quietly. "Please, do not run away." "Where will you even sleep?" "We have bedrolls in the bunkhouse. It is not fancy, but it is shelter." He cupped her face in his hands. "I need you to stay. I need you to see that this does not change anything between us." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He kissed her forehead and then turned to help his men, and she stood there feeling helpless and afraid and desperately in love with a man who refused to believe in her curse. They worked through the night, wetting down the surrounding grass to ensure no embers could reignite anything, checking on the cattle and horses to make sure none had been injured by the fire or scattered in panic. By dawn, the cabin was a smoking ruin, and everyone was beyond exhausted. Jessamine had helped where she could, bringing water, tending a few minor burns, making coffee over a small fire well away from the destruction. Now she stood watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink, trying to process everything that had happened. Rhett came to stand beside her, and they stood in silence for a moment. "What will you do?" she asked. "Rebuild. What else can I do?" He sounded tired but not defeated. "I still have some savings in the bank in town. It will be enough to buy lumber and supplies. The men and I can do most of the work ourselves." "How long will it take?" "Months, probably. We will need to build before winter sets in." He looked down at her. "Will you help me?" "Help you?" "Rhett, I cannot build a house." "No, but you can help me plan it, decide where rooms should go, what size to make things. I want to build a real home this time, not just a rough cabin, and I want your input on it." "Why?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "Because I hope someday you will live in it with me." Her heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I love you, Jessamine Crawford. I know it is fast, maybe too fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are brave and kind and so much stronger than you believe. You make me laugh. You make me want to be better. And I want to build a life with you if you will have me. You cannot love me. You barely know me. I know everything I need to know, and I am hoping you feel the same way." Did she? She thought about the past weeks, the way her heart lifted when she saw him, the way she felt safe in his presence, the way she had rushed to his side the moment she heard about the fire despite her terror. Yes, she loved him. She loved him desperately and completely, and that terrified her more than anything. "I do love you," she admitted, "but I am so afraid." "Then be afraid with me. But do not let fear win. Do not let this curse you think you have steal your happiness." He squeezed her hands. "I am not going anywhere. No matter what happens, no matter what bad luck comes our way, I will be right here, loving you and fighting beside you. You just have to be brave enough to let me." She looked at his face, grimy with soot but open and honest and full of love, and felt something break open inside her. All her life she had been running from grief, from connection, from the possibility of more loss. But maybe Rhett was right. Maybe the real curse was not that bad things happened, but that she let fear keep her from experiencing the good things too. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will help you plan the house. Yes, I love you. Yes to all of it." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her close and kissed her, deep and passionate, uncaring of his ranch hands probably watching. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I do not have a ring yet," he said, "but as soon as we get back to town I will buy one. Will you marry me, Jessamine?" "Yes." He whooped and spun her around, and for a moment all the darkness and fear receded, leaving only joy. His men emerged from the bunkhouse, grinning, and congratulated them with handshakes and backslaps. They celebrated with the remains of the coffee and some biscuits Jackson had somehow managed to make, and Jessamine felt accepted and welcomed in a way she had not experienced in years. Later that morning, Rhett took her back to town, and they went straight to the jeweler. He let her choose the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light beautifully. He slipped it on her finger and she stared at it in wonder. "How soon will you marry me?" he asked. "How soon do you want?" "Tomorrow," she laughed. "We need to plan a proper wedding." "Why?" "I have you, you have me, we have a preacher in town. That is all we need." "Rhett Anderson, are you trying to rush me to the altar?" "Absolutely. Before you come to your senses and realize you could do much better." She kissed him, right there on the street in front of God and everyone. 2 weeks, she said. "Give me 2 weeks to prepare." 2 weeks, he agreed, but not a day longer. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. Mrs. Potter helped Jessamine sew a simple white dress, and the other boarding house residents contributed lace and ribbon. The whole town seemed excited about the wedding, and the general store was suddenly filled with people offering congratulations and advice. Mr. Henderson gave Jessamine time off to prepare, and even seemed genuinely happy for her. Rhett spent those weeks organizing the rebuilding effort, ordering supplies, and clearing the debris from the fire. He came into town every evening to see Jessamine, and they would walk and talk and plan their future. He described the house he wanted to build, 2 stories with a wide porch and real glass windows. She told him about the garden she wanted to plant, the kitchen she hoped to have. "I want children," he said one evening as they sat by the creek. "Lots of them. The house will be big enough." "How many is lots?" 4, 5, as many as you will give me," she laughed, but the idea filled her with longing. A family, a real family, children to love and raise. It seemed too good to be true. "What if something happens to them?" she asked quietly. "What if it does not? What if they grow up healthy and strong and give us grandchildren someday?" He took her hand. "You have to stop waiting for disaster, Jessamine. Sometimes good things happen too." The wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in the small church at the edge of town. Jessamine wore her white dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Rhett wore a new black suit that made him look impossibly handsome. His sister Margaret surprised them by arriving from California 2 days before, bringing her husband and children, and Jessamine was grateful to meet the family she was marrying into. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Jessamine's hands shook as she took her vows, and when Rhett slipped a second gold band on her finger to sit beside the engagement ring, tears spilled down her cheeks. He kissed her as her husband for the first time, and the small church erupted in applause. The town held a reception in the hall, with music and dancing and a feast that seemed to appear from nowhere. Jessamine danced with her new husband, with his ranch hands, with Mr. Henderson and Doc Harrington and half the men in town. She laughed more that day than she had in years, and when Rhett finally swept her away into the evening, her face hurt from smiling. He had arranged for them to spend their wedding night in the nicest hotel room in Tombstone, and Jessamine was grateful not to return to her boarding house room or ride out to the ranch in her wedding dress. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed and fresh linens. Rhett closed the door behind them, and suddenly the air was thick with anticipation. He turned to her, his expression tender. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "I am glad you think so." He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but she had never been more certain of anything. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. He was careful and patient, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Jessamine felt a peace she had not known was possible. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too, Mrs. Anderson, Mrs. Anderson." She was someone's wife, part of a family again. The thought made her smile in the darkness. They spent the next day in town, accepting congratulations and well wishes before finally heading out to the ranch. The cabin was still being rebuilt, but Rhett had arranged for a large tent to serve as temporary living quarters. It was not fancy, but it was theirs. Over the following months, Jessamine threw herself into ranch life. She learned to ride properly, to help with the cattle, to keep house in rough conditions. The new house slowly took shape, rising from the ashes of the old cabin like a promise. Rhett worked alongside his men every day, and in the evenings, he would come to Jessamine smelling of sawdust and sweat, and they would plan the next phase of construction. She planted a vegetable garden and tended it faithfully. She made friends with the ranch hands, cooking meals for them and tending their minor injuries. She wrote letters to Margaret in California, building a relationship with her new sister-in-law. Life fell into a rhythm that felt sustainable and good. 6 months after the wedding, on a cold January morning, Jessamine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. A baby, their baby, growing inside her. But what if something happened? What if the curse she carried touched this innocent life? She waited until evening to tell Rhett, her anxiety building all day. When she finally blurted it out over dinner, he went still for a moment, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "A baby. We are having a baby. Yes, I think I am about 2 months along." He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "This is the best news, the best possible news. What if something goes wrong? What if everything goes right?" He pulled back to look at her. "Jessamine, you have to stop waiting for disaster. We have been married 6 months and nothing bad has happened. The ranch is doing well. The house is nearly finished. We are happy. At some point you have to accept that maybe the curse was never real, but so many people have died. Yes, they have. And that is tragic and painful, and you have every right to grieve them. But their deaths were not your fault. They were not caused by loving you. They were just the random cruelty of life." He placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "This baby is a blessing, our blessing. And we are going to love it and raise it and teach it to be brave like its mother." "I am not brave. You are the bravest person I know. You survived losing everyone you loved. You opened your heart again even though you were terrified. You married me and moved to a ranch and learned a whole new way of life. If that is not brave, I do not know what is." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop living in fear and start trusting in the possibility of happiness. The pregnancy progressed without incident. Jessamine bloomed with health, her face glowing and her body growing round. Rhett was attentive and protective, constantly worrying that she was working too hard. They moved into the new house in March, and Jessamine spent hours preparing a nursery, sewing tiny clothes and arranging the cradle Rhett had built with his own hands. The baby came in late August, on a day so hot the air seemed to shimmer. Jessamine labored through the afternoon and into the evening with Margaret, who had arrived 2 weeks earlier, supporting her through each contraction. Rhett paced outside, forbidden from the room by Margaret's strict orders, his worry evident to everyone. Finally, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, a baby's cry split the air. Margaret emerged a few minutes later, grinning. "You have a son, Rhett. A healthy, perfect son." He rushed past her into the room, finding Jessamine exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," she said softly. "We have a son." Rhett knelt beside the bed, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed her forehead. Thank you." They named him Robert James Anderson, after Rhett's father and Jessamine's father, and the baby quickly became the center of their world. He was healthy and strong, with a lusty cry and an appetite that left Jessamine exhausted but happy. Rhett proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Robert in the middle of the night, singing off key lullabies that made Jessamine laugh. As the months passed, and Robert continued to thrive, Jessamine felt the last of her fear beginning to release. Nothing bad had happened. Her son was healthy. Her husband loved her. The ranch was prospering. Maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong all along. Maybe the curse had never existed except in her own wounded heart. Life settled into a new rhythm. Robert grew from an infant to a chubby, laughing toddler. Jessamine discovered she was pregnant again when Robert was 18 months old, and this time the news brought only joy. Rhett's dreams of a large family seemed to be coming true. Their daughter was born on a clear April morning in 1885, the delivery easier than Robert's had been. She had Jessamine's hazel eyes and a cap of dark hair, and they named her Margaret Rose, for Rhett's sister, and because Jessamine had always loved roses. "2 children," Rhett said, holding his daughter while Robert napped in the next room. "2 perfect, healthy children. I am the luckiest man alive." "We still have room for more," Jessamine teased. "Oh, I plan on filling this house. I am far from done with you, Mrs. Anderson." Life was good. Better than good, it was full and rich and meaningful. Jessamine helped run the ranch, kept the house, raised the children, and loved her husband with a depth that still sometimes surprised her. The fear that had haunted her for so many years faded to a distant memory, surfacing only occasionally in the middle of the night when she would check on her sleeping children and marvel at how lucky she was. Robert was 4 and Margaret was 2 when Jessamine realized she was pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her tired and sick through the first months. But she pushed through, determined to give Rhett another child. The baby came early, on a snowy December evening in 1887. It was a long, difficult labor, and Jessamine was weak and exhausted by the time the midwife placed another daughter in her arms. This one was smaller than the others had been, with pale skin and a weak cry that worried everyone. "She is so tiny," Jessamine whispered. "She will be fine," Rhett assured her, but his voice was tight with worry. "She just needs time to grow strong." They named her Julia Ann, and for the first few weeks she seemed to struggle. She nursed poorly and cried constantly, and Jessamine barely slept, constantly checking to make sure Julia was still breathing. The old fear came roaring back, whispering that this was it. This was the curse finally catching up to her. But Julia gradually grew stronger. By the time she was 3 months old, she had caught up to where she should be, and by 6 months, she was as healthy and robust as her siblings had been. Jessamine slowly relaxed, accepting that her daughter was going to be fine. "See," Rhett said one evening as they watched all 3 children playing on the floor. "I told you everything would be all right. You were right, about everything." She leaned against him. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Never. You are stuck with me forever, Jessamine Anderson." The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The children grew, the cattle multiplied, and the ranch prospered. Rhett expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land when it became available. Jessamine became known throughout the area for her healing skills, often helping neighbors with injuries and illnesses. The loneliness and fear that had defined her life before Rhett seemed like a distant dream. Robert grew into a tall, quiet boy who loved horses and spent every moment he could in the barn. Margaret was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, constantly asking questions and getting into mischief. Julia was the gentle one, preferring to sit with her mother and learn to sew or help in the garden. When Julia was 5, Jessamine discovered she was pregnant again. She was 35 now, and this pregnancy felt different, harder on her body. But Rhett was delighted at the prospect of another child, and she could not deny him the joy. Their 4th child was born in the spring of 1893, another boy, strong and healthy from the start. They named him Samuel, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Rhett declared he would build additions to the house if needed, that they could have a dozen children if Jessamine was willing. But Jessamine knew Samuel would be their last. Her body told her so, and she was content with the 4 beautiful children they had created together. She was 40 years old, tired but happy, surrounded by love and life. The children grew and changed, bringing new challenges and joys. Robert, at 15, was already taller than Rhett and working the ranch like a man. Margaret, at 13, was beautiful and headstrong, constantly arguing with her father about what young ladies should and should not do. Julia, at 11, was her mother's constant helper, learning to cook and sew and manage a household. And Samuel, at 6, was the baby of the family, spoiled by everyone and full of mischief. Jessamine sometimes looked at her life and marveled at how far she had come from that lonely, frightened young woman in Tombstone. She had a family, a home, a purpose. The curse she had believed in so fervently had never materialized, or perhaps had been broken by Rhett's unwavering faith in her. One evening, as she and Rhett sat on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "Do you remember the day we met? In the general store, of course. You tried so hard not to look at me, but I saw you watching." She laughed. "I thought you were trouble from the first moment. I was the best kind of trouble." He took her hand. "Do you ever regret it, marrying me, building this life? Not for a single second. You saved me, Rhett." "No. You saved yourself. You just let me help." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. From inside the house came the sounds of their children, arguing and laughing in equal measure. It was the sound of home, of family, of everything Jessamine had been afraid to want. The years continued to pass. Robert married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and built a house on the north section of the Anderson land, starting his own family. Margaret shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher and left for school in Phoenix. Julia married at 19, a young rancher she had known since childhood. And Samuel, the baby, grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Jessamine and Rhett grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter. The ranch passed gradually into Robert and Samuel's capable hands, and they built a smaller house closer to town, spending their days in comfortable semi-retirement. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration that filled the main ranch house to bursting. There were 8 grandchildren now, with another on the way, and the noise and chaos made Jessamine's heart full to overflowing. 25 years, Rhett said that evening, after everyone had gone home and they sat alone on their porch. "Where did the time go?" "Into this," Jessamine said, gesturing at the ranch spread before them, the lights from the main house visible in the distance. "Into family and love and everything I never thought I would have. Do you ever think about that curse you believed in?" "Sometimes, mostly to marvel at how wrong I was." "You were not wrong, just wounded. Grief can make us believe terrible things about ourselves." He pulled her close. "I am glad I was stubborn enough to fight through your fear." "Danger never scared you before," she quoted, remembering that first warning she had given him. "Still does not. Though these days the most dangerous thing in my life is trying to keep up with our grandchildren." She laughed, and the sound carried across the evening air, full of joy and contentment. They had built a good life together, she and her cowboy, despite all her fears and warnings. The curse had never been real, or perhaps love had been powerful enough to break it. As the stars emerged overhead, Jessamine thought about the scared young woman she had been, alone and convinced she was dangerous to everyone around her. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that it would be all right, that happiness was possible, that love was worth the risk. But perhaps she did not need to. Perhaps every day she lived with joy and gratitude was its own message to the past, proof that fear did not have to win. The years continued, gentle and full. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated marriages and births, mourned the losses that inevitably came with age. Doc Harrington passed away, then Mrs. Potter, then others they had known in Tombstone. But Jessamine faced these losses without the crippling fear of her youth. Death was part of life, sad but natural, not a curse but simply the way of all things. On their 30th anniversary, Rhett surprised her with a trip to California to visit Margaret and her family. It was the farthest Jessamine had traveled since coming to Arizona, and she marveled at the ocean, the tall trees, the bustle of San Francisco. But she was glad to return home, to the desert landscape she had come to love, the ranch that had become her heart's home. They grew old together with grace, their love deepening with each passing year. Rhett's hair turned completely white, and he moved more slowly, but his eyes still lit up when Jessamine entered a room. Her face was lined with wrinkles, her hands rough from years of work, but she felt more beautiful at 60 than she had at 20. Secure in the knowledge of being loved, Samuel took over full management of the ranch when Rhett was 70, and Jessamine was secretly relieved. They spent their days in their small house, tending a garden, reading books, entertaining grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was a peaceful existence, earned through years of hard work and dedication. On a warm spring evening, a month after Rhett's 75th birthday, he suffered a heart attack while working in the garden. He died in Jessamine's arms, his last words a whispered "I love you" that she would carry in her heart forever. The grief was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But surrounded by her children and grandchildren, supported by the community they had built, Jessamine weathered it. She mourned her husband deeply, but she did not let the grief consume her as she might have in her youth. She knew Rhett would want her to keep living, to keep loving, to find joy in the family they had created together. She lived another 10 years, surrounded by love, watching her great-grandchildren grow, sharing stories of the past with anyone who would listen. She told them about meeting a stubborn cowboy in a general store in Tombstone, about how he had refused to believe in her curse, about how he had loved her into wholeness. "Your grandfather was the bravest man I ever knew," she would say. "Not because he faced down danger, but because he faced down my fear and loved me anyway." On a clear morning in 1925, Jessamine Anderson died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by photographs of her family, worn copies of favorite books, and the simple gold rings Rhett had placed on her finger 52 years earlier. She was 86 years old, and she had lived a life full of love and meaning, exactly as Rhett had promised she could. At her funeral, held at the ranch with half the county in attendance, Robert stood and told the story of how his parents met, how his father had pursued his mother despite her warnings, how love had proven stronger than fear. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, a testament to courage and faith and the transforming power of love. The ranch continued, run by Samuel's children and then their children, growing and changing with the times but always remembering the couple who had built it from nothing. The house Rhett and Jessamine had constructed stood for decades, sheltering new generations, full of laughter and life and love. And in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, two headstones sat side by side, marking the graves of Rhett Anderson and Jessamine Crawford Anderson. Visitors would sometimes stop there, reading the inscription Rhett had chosen years before his death, words that captured the essence of their story. She warned me that loving her was dangerous. I said danger never scared me before. I was right. Below that, added after Jessamine's death, was her response, the final word on their love story. He loved away my fear and taught me to live. I was blessed beyond measure. The desert wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied, the eternal sounds of ranch life continuing as it always had. The land endured, as did the legacy of love left by a frightened young woman and the stubborn cowboy who refused to give up on her. Their story became legend in the area, told and retold until fact and embellishment blurred together. But at its heart, the truth remained simple and profound. Love, when it is brave and true and steadfast, can heal even the deepest wounds. It can break curses, real or imagined. It can transform fear into hope, loneliness into belonging, despair into joy. Jessamine had believed herself cursed, dangerous, destined for eternal solitude. Rhett had seen through the fear to the woman beneath, worthy of love and capable of great happiness. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a family and a legacy that stretched across generations. In the end, the greatest danger had not been loving Jessamine. It had been the possibility that fear might keep them apart, that she might run away before giving love a chance. But Rhett's courage and persistence had prevailed, and in doing so, he had given Jessamine the greatest gift possible. A life worth living, full of purpose and connection and love. The curse had never been real, but the love certainly was. It echoed through the years, present in every child and grandchild, in the thriving ranch, in the stories told around dinner tables and campfires. Jessamine and Rhett's love had become part of the land itself, woven into the history of Arizona, a testament to what could be built when two people chose each other against all odds. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Dragoon Mountains, people claimed to see two figures walking hand in hand near the creek, well, perhaps some love was too strong to be contained by mortal life. Perhaps some bonds, forged in courage and strengthened by years of devotion, endured beyond death itself. The ranch stood, the family flourished, and the legend lived on, reminding each new generation that fear, no matter how powerful it seems, is no match for love given freely and received with an open heart. Danger never scared Rhett Anderson, and in the end, the only danger had been missing out on the most profound love either of them would ever know. Their story was complete, its ending as happy and fulfilling as any fairy tale, but far more real. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind something beautiful. What more could anyone ask from a life? The wind carried the answer across the desert, nothing more. It was enough. It was everything. And it would endure as long as people believed in the power of love to transform, to heal, to make whole what fear had broken. In a general store in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1882, two lives had intersected and changed forever. A frightened young woman had issued a warning. A stubborn cowboy had refused to heed it, and from that moment, everything had become possible. That was the true magic, the real miracle. Not that tragedy could be prevented or death defied, but that love could flourish anyway, that joy could be found despite loss, that two wounded souls could heal each other and build something lasting and true. Jessamine had warned the cowboy that loving her was dangerous. He said danger never scared him before, and in the end, they had both been right and both been wrong. Love was dangerous in its way, requiring vulnerability and courage and the willingness to risk everything. But it was also the safest place in the world, the only real security, the truest home. Their children knew it. Their grandchildren felt it. And generations yet unborn would hear the story and understand that love, real love, was worth any risk, any danger, any fear. It was worth everything, because it gave everything in return. The story ended as all good stories should, with love triumphant, family flourishing, and two souls who found each other against impossible odds and built a life together that honored both the pain they had survived and the joy they had created. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth believing in. And in the small house near town, in the ranch house up in the hills, in homes scattered across Arizona and beyond, that story was told again and again, keeping alive the memory of Jessamine and Rhett Anderson and the love that had changed everything.